Welcome to the show.
What show is that?
Welcome to the show.
I'm trying to connect.
Imagine Muhammad Ali,
You have an internet.
as a white man.
Go fuck
Imagine
yourself,
him in the
because
prime
it
of his
doesn't
life.
matter.
He was 6'3", 250 pounds, and very, very angry. Clay's greatest pleasure in life was fighting. His favorite weapon was the Bowie knife. Knife made famous after American explorer Daniel Bowie, or Bowie, however you want to say it. So what Cassius Clay would do, he'd walk into a pro-slavery rally, throw the speaker off the podium, and then proceed to give an abolitionist message. It would invariably lead to a fight. He loved to fight when he had the physical disadvantage, and he was particularly fond of heckling his congressman. I can't remember his name. But this congressman got so sick of Clay being there, he eventually hired armed guards. But Clay always defeated them. So the congressman conspired to hire a Louisiana gunman to kill him. Samuel M. Brown was hired, and at a rally near Russell's Cave about 5 miles out of Lexington, Kentucky, Clay started his usual fight, but Brown hit him from behind as hard as he could with his cane as Clay advanced on him, and then shot him. But in the smoke and the chaos, the next thing everybody knew, Clay was on top of Brown, and he cut off one of his ears. And then, so the indictment for mayhem states. But for still better measure, he carved out one of Brown's eyes, and then he split his head to the bone with his knife. Finally, he picked him up, wrestler style, and threw his body over the wall and down a hill where the body eventually careened into the waters of a creek that came out of this place called Russell's Cave. And the few days later, the newspapers announced that Clay had died in this encounter, but he didn't. What happened was, as Clay was reaching for his knife, which he wore on his breast, the metal scabbard at the bottom tip of the scabbard was raised such that it was covering where the bullet hit him in the chest and ricocheted around, and there's a hole in the back of his coat where the bullet exited. Clay's cousin, because Clay was indicted for mayhem, which is kind of awesome. You could actually be indicted for mayhem back then. Clay's cousin was a senator named Henry Clay, and he defended him on this occasion in court. I have one quote from Henry Clay that I got from Dr. McClellan. "Standing there without aiders or abettors, without popular sympathy, with the pistol of a hired murderer pointed at his heart, would you have had him meaningly and cowardly fly?" Basically, he was playing on the all-white, all-Southern slave-owning jury's sympathies of honor, where if somebody's, going to kill you, you certainly have the right to defend yourself. And in this case, they thought that perhaps Cousin Clay was correct and that Cassius Clay did behave properly, and he was acquitted. Another time, he walked into a pro-slavery rally, rushed up to the speaker's podium, pushed the speaker out of the way, and then 5 men jumped up and grabbed him. 4 of the men held him down, and a 5th one grabbed his own Bowie knife and stabbed him almost in the heart with it. That was the problem. Almost in the heart. By this point, Clay was starting to have a good time. He pulled the knife out of his own chest by the blade and killed 2 of these men on the spot. The other 3 ran away. So he survived all of this. For a while, they were saying he was dead again, and when he recovered, he announced that he was going to become a Republican. And at this point, the Republican Party was brand new. I believe the 1860 election was their first, or it was the one before that in 1856. I don't remember when the last Whig election was. I think the last Whig election was either in 56 or 52, so depending. There could have been an earlier Republican, but basically, Lincoln was the first major Republican candidate. And he didn't get a single electoral vote from any southern state. It's important to remember. He wasn't even listed on the ballot in 1860, here where I am in Virginia. And having announced himself a Republican, Clay would go to another rally, push the guy out, and stare into the eyes of his audience. And one time he reached out into his pocket and slapped down a copy of the Bible on the podium. And he said, "For those of you who believe in the laws of God, I have this argument against slavery." And Then he said, for those of you who believe in the laws of man, I have this argument against slavery. He'd pull out a copy of the Constitution. Then finally he'd say, for those of you who believe neither in the laws of God nor of man, I have this argument against slavery, and he'd take out his Bowie knife and then proceed to give his speech uninterrupted. He wrote a book called The Technique of Bowie Knife Fighting by Cassius Marcellus Clay, his one contribution to world literature. And basically there was there's a passage from it where he explains the easiest way to kill somebody with the Bowie knife is to obtain a headlock with them and then slit their throat. But sometimes you come across a particularly agile opponent who thwarts this maneuver, in which case what you should not do, as I used to before I became experienced, is to stab them in the chest. There's too much risk of hitting a rib. Instead, what you should do is stab them at the navel with a line down to the hilt, which is a funny way of saying stab them in the gut, go down to the side. You're essentially eviscerating them. And he says that generally brings it into the confrontation.
Yes, fantastic literature there. Fantastic contribution to the world. I will buy that book.
Good luck finding it. It would be a real treasure if you could find a copy of it. I'm sure it's probably only been printed once. But if you could find either an original or a reprinting of it, that would be great.
Yeah,
I never bothered to look it up. Yeah. And most of this information, if you want a citation, is mostly from a book called The Lion of Whitehall.
But how did they allow this book to be published? Nowadays, they would say it's something against the rights of humans and all that stuff.
Because that book,
criminal act.
Because that book about him was written in the 1930s, I think. I mean, this guy was famous a long time ago, and I'm digging it back up because some person that I know dug it up and shone some light on it for me, and I'm just passing the ball to you.
It's nice, but if you have a major star today, write a book about how you can kill someone with a knife,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It would not happen.
But this was back when. But this guy was living when dueling was still legal.
Uh-huh.
You could still legally duel in I think Kentucky until probably about the 1830s or so.
So it was true American democracy.
I don't think there's anything necessarily democratic about dueling. I think it's a great idea, but I think that because it would cut down on innocent bystanders. If two people want to kill each other, let them do it. Just make them go out in the woods and do it so that they're not going to hurt anyone other than themselves.
Yeah, and many aristocrats died in this kind of activities, so it's better for the population if they are less,
Yeah, and he was not a poor man. This would have been somebody I don't think we could consider him an aristocrat, but a plantation of 100 slaves in eastern Kentucky was a considerably sized plantation. The bigger ones that you hear about with thousands of slaves are either in the Caribbean or they're sort of around the lowlands of the Carolinas, some of the lowlands in Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi.
Thousands of slaves, so it was like a city of slaves?
On a single plantation, yeah. I've
an
heard
entire
of
community built up on slavery.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, let me see here. Where were we? Okay, yeah. There was a man in Illinois. Illinois was a free state at the time, by the way. And his name was Elijah Lovejoy. He had a big press where he was talking about abolitionism. So it was an anti-slavery newspaper or magazine. I don't remember. They're kind of the same difference at this time. Anyway, he had a publication that was against slavery, and his place was burned down, and Elijah Lovejoy was eventually killed by an angry mob. Clay thought that this might be a good way to start a fight. So Clay decided to get a 2-story brick building in a town, and the top floor, the second floor, there was a staircase that led up to it. He put big iron doors at the floor level, at the ground level, and the second story level. And at the second-story door, he placed 2 cannon that he filled with horseshoes and nails, and aimed them chest high as you were coming up the steps. And inside this room was where he had his printing press, and near the printing press he had a stacks of shotguns. And if you got through his iron doors, and you got through his cannons, and you got through his shotguns, he'd climb out a ladder to an escape hatch at the roof, where there were fuses that went to 4 big barrels of gunpowder, one at each corner, and he'd just blow the whole place up. Cassius Clay was able to experience freedom of the press through this mechanism. And let's see, the Civil War broke out in 1861. When that happened, he could do legally what he had been doing illegally for decades, carving up slave owners. So he marched up to Lincoln in D.C. with 200 men who were marching vigorously out of step. He stopped Lincoln as he drove out of the grounds of the White House and demanded to be made a general in the Union Army. Now, Lincoln was not an uncompassionate man, and releasing Cassius Clay with an army and turning him loose on the South would probably have been the 19th century equivalent to first strike with a nuclear weapon. But neither was Cassius Clay the sort of man who liked to hear the word no. Lincoln realized that. So Lincoln commissioned him as a major general in the Union Army, and then looked for the farthest spot to send him. So he made him the United States envoy to Russia.
So Cassius Clay was a good political troll of those times.
I don't know if you could say that he was a troll, because he did what he was going to be doing anyway as he was in Russia. He wasn't obeying any kind of directions. I don't even think he was really given any.
Yeah, and that part with, like, his house being protected with so many protections.
Oh, that was where he had his printing press. That wasn't where he lived. Yeah.
That's awesome stuff, man.
Yeah, I'd like to see somebody try that now. But the problem is, we all dream of simpler days when you could actually get big iron doors and cannons, and that would be able to let you experience freedom of the press. But today, it's all digitized. As far as I'm concerned, once I input data into a computer, it's in a netherland that I will never understand or have any control over.
You are registered, my friend. Everything you do is registered.
What do you mean by that exactly?
Well, maybe I didn't understood your point, but by what you are saying, saying about the digitalized world, when you want to buy something.
I'm saying computers are temperamental as shit, and it pisses me off because it shouldn't take me longer to look up my email in 2013 than it did in 2003. Internet has been getting slower. The computers have been getting shittier in the past 5 years, and it should be working that way. The processor's 8 times as powerful as my last computer. Why is it slower? Oh, you have a virus. What the fuck?
The mainstream, if you use mainstream software and mainstream stuff, you get scammed. But you can actually use these powerful computers to, if you really know what to do, you can make a very fast computer and very fast.
So you're saying I should go to like a Linux-based operating system and quit using Windows? Is that what you're telling me?
Not only that, but you would have to
say, "Oh, why aren't you using a Mac, you idiot?"
You would have to let go of the Google services and all of that mainstream kind of stuff, And also your browser, don't use Internet Explorer. You see, in this world, you have to be very smart in the IT world, because if you use what they give you, and what is more popular, you get scammed. That's the thing. And also you get very under surveillance. All right. So, you can go back to your presentation.
Okay. I'll have to have you help me with that. Maybe one of these days I'll do a show for computer stuff for people like me and people even like my mother who could sorely use some education in that department.
Yeah, if you like, I can team view your computer and just install whatever you need, and take out the unnecessary processes and whatever unnecessary stuff you have in your computer,
Okay. Because it's not pornography. I've specifically not ever used it for that.
It's not enough or not, man.
Computers. It's like, well, it used to be, back in the day, it was like if you got a virus, it's probably because of porn. If you didn't do that, you didn't get viruses. That's how it was for like a long time, man. I mean, I've been using the internet since 1997. I remember, that was how it was for a long time. A good 10 years there. Of course, 2007 was 5 years ago now, or 6 years.
Yeah, the point is whenever you install something, it automatically installs other things that you don't necessarily need, and those things slow you down. And it's also a case of having mainstream stuff, which, it's like going on the street and buying your vegetables from Walmart instead of a nice local shop, where they have more quality products.
From Walmart.
I'm just saying, making a simple analogy.
Because I've even looked at the brands of bagged potatoes at grocery stores and whole organic places and things like that, and I've become convinced that Yukon Gold potatoes are grown in 3 locations in North America, and anybody in this hemisphere eating a Yukon Gold potato is eating it from the same fucking farm, whether it's sold as organic or what. But that's just me on that topic.
Yeah, you could be right about that.
I do agree fresh food is better. I mean, I do prefer fresh potatoes that were just harvested. You could taste that difference.
Uh-huh.
Potatoes it might surprise many Americans to hear this. Potatoes have a flavor. Believe it or not.
Yeah.
They actually have a flavor, but you have to eat them probably within, 3 or 4 weeks after they come out of the ground in order to taste it.
Yeah, I see your logic.
And for God's sakes, leave the skin on it, people. The skin's where half the vitamins are.
Yeah, right. We can transform this into an organic.
Oh, I've got recipes I could talk about too, but yeah,
recipes,
this is
food recipes.
Oh yeah, man, I make a badass pork chop. Yeah.
You are a cook.
Basil oil, olive oil, lime juice, thyme, and basil and oregano with a little bit of onion and garlic.
Yes. If we have vegetarians on the program listening, yeah.
Well, then they would enjoy my bit about eating potato skins.
Yeah, that's true. It's you have something to cover everyone.
Mhm. Yeah, pretty much. So.
Okay.
All right. I'm sorry to do this so early, but can I take a little break right now?
Right now? Okay. I can play a song.
Yeah. Cool. Then I'll get back and I'll do a nice long haul.
All right. Let me see. I wasn't ready for this, so yeah, I'm just gonna.
You have to always be ready.
All right. See you after the break.
All right.
Hans, are you there, man? I think Jan, Eric, Hans.
Yes.
What's up, man?
No, not much. I'm just listening in for the time being.
Cool. Temperature in your igloo. How's the temperature in your igloo?
It's 6:16.
my country, we start at minus, I don't know, 20, 30 degrees Celsius, but like really rarely, you know.
Yeah, it's same thing here.
In the winter.
Yes.
And we had like a big rain with chunks of ice, and it destroyed the currents that I had around my house.
Oh.
Yes. Fruits are dead. And some chickens got infected and I had to cut them and eat them.
Infected by what?
They got cold, so you don't leave them to die. So you have to cut them.
Okay, yeah. They got freeze damage.
Yeah. Say again? Miles?
Can
you hear me now?
Yeah.
Loud and clear across the Atlantic.
Can we resume?
Yeah, whatever. Sorry, I wasn't ready to begin because my cat kept bitching for his wet food. I didn't think he was going to be able to wait much longer without causing a fuss.
Right, whatever. Okay, so 3, 2, 1.
So, again, the thing is, he was sent over. Cassius Clay was sent over to Russia, and it was just sent there to, Lincoln. I don't think really even thought twice about it. It was just a removed, isolated spot where it didn't really matter what he did, just place to send him. But the funny thing is, he was the perfect guy for that job. The Russians loved him, and Clay soon realized that the Russian noblemen learned from a young age how to fight with swords, rapiers, and they liked that kind of stuff. So they were much more fun to fight with Bowie knives than the Southern aristocrats in the United States that really didn't have that kind of training. And Russia was still a rough and tumble kind of society at this point, with lots of people drunk in cafes and challenging one another to duels and killing each other regularly. So Clay fit right in. And when he was a diplomat, he carried what he called his dress-up Bowie knife, which had a ivory handle. But for everyday wear, he had a series of bone-handled knives. And he apparently killed one archduke, one heir to the throne. He probably had an affair with the Tsar's daughter, possibly even the Tsar's wife. And when he came home, he had a child that he had fathered with a Russian ballerina. The Russians got annoyed eventually because as they were usually the ones to challenge him to the fight, as the challengee, he had the right to choose his weapon. And he invariably fought with, the Bowie knife. One day, the Russians figured, if we can challenge him to make initiate the duel, we could choose the weapons, have rapiers, and then we'll be able to kill him. So one day, this guy walked up to Clay as he was eating his dinner at a restaurant somewhere, I think in St. Petersburg. He walked up to him, slapped him in the face with his glove, and stood back to accept his call to a duel. But Clay just stood up, punched the guy as hard as he could in the face, and he fell down backwards, carrying with him a storm of falling china. And then Clay looked around belligerently for further opposition, and seeing none, parted the tails of his frock coat, sat down to resume his interrupted meal. He had been garnering a reputation for himself in St. Petersburg for his quick pugnacity. What had kept him alive in eastern Kentucky was, his ability to be ready to fight at the drop of a hat to save his own life. And he was acting accordingly when he was in Russia. And incidentally, there were a few people saying that Clay should run with Lincoln as his vice president in his re-election of 1864. Lincoln was looking for someone from a border state. Kentucky was a border state. And after Lincoln would have been assassinated, Clay could have become president. Imagine that. And or we were saying last time, Vosto, how that should be a movie. But I don't think that'll happen, but I think it might be interesting, or at least a short story. But historical hypotheticals are, it's never really a wise idea, because there's so many random factors that go on. It is impossible to know, but you could still, I think it's still fun to speculate sometimes. After the war was over, Civil War, you think that he might have chilled out a little bit and started to enjoy his retirement. And the late 1860s, he would have been in his 50s. But he didn't. At the age of 84, Cassius Clay got married. The bride was 15 years old. The townspeople went apeshit. They rounded up a posse. They're going to go to Whitehall Plantation, arrest Clay, pick up the girl, and bring her back to her parents. Here's a letter from the sheriff of that town explaining why that mission failed. Quote, Richmond, Kentucky, November 14th, 1894. Judge John C. Chenault. Dear Judge, I'm reporting about the posse like you said I had to. Heck, he wrenched his neck as his horse throwed him when he was trying to get away. And others ran through the cornfield up around to the cabins in the spring house to the back porch. I think this might do it. Respectfully, Joshua P. Simmons, High Sheriff. That didn't work either. At the age of 93, Cassius Clay had his last fight with a bowie knife. 3 men broke into his house at night, and the next morning, he sent a servant for help, and the next morning, one of the 3 men was found running down the road, turning himself in. They found a second one in his yard who had bled to death from a naval wound, and a third was dead in his parlor with his jugular cut. But Clay sustained wounds in this encounter and died a short time later, ending a glorious diplomatic career. So that is the end of Cassius Clay.
Epic personality.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And the rest of this one, actually, is about a completely different subject. It's essentially a little breakdown of how American native cultures can be so separated. And now that I think about it, I could use that and then go into the explanation that I did 2 shows ago about the Natchez Indians. Does that sound good?
Yeah, it sounds cool, man.
Well, American Indian, Amerindians, Native Americans, American Aborigines, whatever you want to call them, are unique in the world, especially South America, just because the linguistic diversity, as a ballpark estimate of cultural diversity, is greatest in Papua New Guinea and in South America. There are more languages in New Guinea and South America combined, more language families, than there are in the rest of the world put together. 30% of them are in Papua New Guinea, and about 25 to 40% of them are in South America.
Yeah, that was the most fascinating piece of information I heard. The amount of diversity which I cannot explain, and we didn't have that much diversity in Europe. Like, we have 4 languages here and 4 language families. Yeah,
something like that. You have the Uralic. It's easy to say which European languages are non-Indo-European. Basque is its own language family. Hungarian, Finnish, and Estonian are either their own family. I think Hungarian might be its own family, and the other, Estonian and Finnish, are part of the Uralic family. And there's other languages on the other side of the Urals, and I guess what would be the Russian steppe region, where they're also spoken out there. But yeah, everything else in Europe is Indo-European.
Yes, I tried to learn the Hungarian language, and it was very, very difficult. And the reading part was impossible. At least.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I recently found out going through. I just make laps on these recordings of linguistic selectors I have. And in Romanian, you put the article after the noun, so you don't say the cat, you say cat the.
No. It's different. Because
Well, I know your word isn't the. I think it's O, right?
This the which you have in the American language, in the English language, sorry. It's completely different to the understanding of Romanian. So it's like two different things. You can take cat but there is an article which is the same as the, but
yeah,
you have to.
Article.
Yeah, we have we say această cartea aceasta, which means this.
Kata means cat.
This book, So.
What's from it? What was just?
Cartea means
curious.
book.
How do you?
Yeah.
Oh, carta means.
So the second part is the article. Sometimes you can say it both. You can say această carte or carte aceasta. It's the same thing. You can say it both ways. It makes the same sense.
But which one would you say if you were talking to a judge, and which way would you say it if you were talking to a bartender? Is it one of those things? Like, is one of them more formal and another more casual?
Yes.
Or does it just completely not matter?
There's the formal speech. There is the,
Okay.
It's completely two different languages.
Yeah, there's a word for that. It's called diaglossia. Diaglossia means two tongues in one mouth, where you have, English doesn't really do it. We have, I think Old English was...
Sometimes you say Mr., but that's
Well, you have two different words for the same thing. Like, in English, you could say children or kids. They mean the exact same thing, but children would be on a tax report, and kids is something that you would say. If you were just casually talking. So you have in German, there's high and low German, where it could be really quite difficult for a foreigner learning German. If you learn high German and you hear low German, you're not really going to understand it. You're going to have to ask them to please speak high German. You're not going to get it. In English, it's not really that different. I would imagine, well, I don't know. Do you have something... Does that make any sense with Romanian, or do you think it's just slight differences of formality?
I don't know what to say here. Like some words, you don't necessarily modify the whole language. It's just like, for example, when you speak to someone that you don't know, even a stranger, that is older than you, or you use the formal speech, and that is like, for example, you have to speak at a plural form, even if it's only one person.
Kind of like we have the royal we. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
No, I don't know much about the royal we.
The queens would refer to themselves in plural. If the queen wanted a tea, she would say, "We would like some tea." It's just her standing.
Yes, only imagine it for, speaking with someone. So you guys don't have, you say you only have you, right? You.
We only have, you plural is the same as you singular.
Yes, so we have a plural for the you. Imagine a plural for the you.
Yeah.
And we use that for speaking just with one single person, if he's a stranger or a guy with authority.
Oh, okay.
So to make you understand better.
Yeah. Well, every language is nuanced, and these little nuances is what makes it so difficult. You can't just pick up a textbook and say, "Oh, what's the Romanian word for this and the Romanian word for that?" And then, "Oh, okay, I'm saying I'm a Romanian sentence," and it doesn't work either way. Like, you can't be Romanian. Like, "Oh, what's the English word for our Romanian word for this?" And vice versa. It doesn't
work. It doesn't work, and that's why Google made certain programming language in which...
the Google Translate is terrible.
The Google Translate, they try to translate based on some natural forms. They try to find the natural patterns, but they can't. You know, it's impossible.
Yeah. Well,
So-
it's not impossible, but what they would have to do is they would have to thoroughly make a program of every single way to say every single word in each language that they want to be able to translate.
No, instead they just use evolution. They let the program evolve for itself based on the reviews of the people.
User-generated feedback, yeah. Or user-generated...
But no one gives a fuck, so no one gives any reviews back. So nothing.
Pretty much, yeah.
Nothing happens. And yeah, we also, like when you say you want to do this, you know, when you say a plural form, you also say a plural verb, you know, like the verb has its own plural, and it all depends on the person and the time that you are speaking, and it's a little more complex than just the English grammar. It's a bunch of stuff that you don't really need, you know. I find English language more
streamlined,
shall we say, efficient, sufficient. You don't have to.
Well,
talk
I
too much.
see what I definitely see what you mean, like by that, because all right, I got another term for y'all here. Inflected languages or inflexive languages. Having inflections in a language is a fancy way of saying it has prefixes and suffixes. You know, things you add to the beginning or the end of a word so that the word takes on a different meaning. You know, classic example from a Latin book is, portam is I carry. Portas is you carry. Portat is he carries.
Yeah.
Portamus is we carry. Portatis, y'all carry. Portant, they carry.
Yes, it's the
Romanian,
same in French.
Yeah, every Romance language has that. English is not a Romance language.
No.
Don't let anybody. I took Latin for 3 years when I was in high school. I was only in high school for 3 years. I got out a year early because it's so stupidly easy. But I never forget the first class of Latin I had. The teacher gave us this thing to show to our parents. It was a piece of paper where she had this little chart. Not really a chart, just sort of a list of reasons why it is worth studying Latin. And one of the first things she said on there was that English is a language based in Latin. Over 70% of the words in the English language derive from Latin. The second part of that statement is correct. The first part is not. And I fought with her about this back and forth, but I wasn't educated enough and knowledgeable enough at the time to really put her in her place. Now I know.
Yes,
English is a Germanic language through and through. There's no
Germanic,
other way around
right.
it. However, she's correct in saying 70% of our vocabulary comes from Latin.
Yes, but the grammar
You know
is certain. It's similar to German.
The grammar and also the words that you use most frequently. Them, that, those, was, were, but, is, am, him, her, that, they, all those kinds of very simple.
Be, because
yeah,
in German
all
say
the conjugations of the verb to be. Yes, all that all comes back to Old English, which is Germanic. Now, the reason 70% of the vocabulary is like that is because of something that's called an inkwell term. That means it comes from the inkwell. In other words, some guy in the 1700s making up a damn word. Now, throughout the late Middle Ages and the Renaissance especially, people, the Renaissance means a changing into new, or, a bringing back, a revival, a regenesis, planting a seed, having death and life come back from it again. That life coming back was the study of Greek and Roman literature, science, and mathematics, such as it was. That's what the Renaissance is all about. The Grand Tour was still being practiced up into World War I by the elite. The Grand Tour is, throughout the 15, 16, 17, and 1800s, part of a proper gentleman's education be it British, French, American, or whatever, was to go on what they called the Grand Tour of Europe, where you'd see Paris and you'd see Bologna and Vienna and Rome and Athens, and you would tour all of these ancient sites and medieval sites and pretty much soak up the last 2,000 years of European history and culture as sort of the finishing touches of your education. So when people were making up words, these inkwell terms, they were derived from Greek and Latin words. A lot of them are turned into prefixes and suffixes in English and other European languages. Anthropology, pologia, is basically Greek for study, and anthros is Greek for human. So anthropology is the study of humans. Paleo, anything, P-A-L-E-A-O, or A-E-O, however you want to spell it, that just means ancient. And, this is how we get these other made-up words. Most of them are, jargon for various scholarly subjects and specific trade practices. I'd wager to say 20% of that 70% is probably medical, surgical terms alone. So most of the language, even though you have 70% of its vocabulary, most people don't speak all of the English, or I don't think anybody speaks all the words of English. English has over 250 the words, 2.5 times more words than French. I think we have more than twice the words of Spanish. We have redundant, triple, septuple redundant words in some cases.
Right. Well, the thing is, in normal speech, people do not use these words, so therefore they get lost, and so Latin countries tend to say that English is simple just because their view on English is based off of what they have seen on American television and movies.
Yeah. But would they say the same thing about British English?
No, we're not too mad on the English people, no.
No, I'm just curious. Like, do you think other people in the world notice the difference? I've been told that most people in Asia can't tell the difference between a British and an American accent.
Oh, no. We definitely feel the difference. And I tell you what, the popularity of the American English is bigger in the schools, when you ask the kids. And even if they try to teach the people British English, the kids still try to get the American accent because of what's popular.
Because it's cool. Yeah, basically, yeah. Because it's cool.
They listen to American music, they watch American movies, so therefore it seems logical to learn the American accent and American English. And I was one of them too, I didn't care about the British English until I learned that they are actually the ones who invented the language.
Well, I mean, it is in the name.
So what is more complex, the British English or the American deviation?
It depends on what form you're talking about. I would argue that the American use of the word fuck is actually quite sophisticated, even though a lot of people don't like to admit it. However, the pool of vocabulary that most, from my personal experience, that most British people have is much bigger than the pool of vocabulary that American people have to draw from.
Yes.
I mean, I have an uncle in my family that says happen chance, and he genuinely thinks that's the real word. He doesn't realize the word is happenstance, not happen chance. Although happen chance, I think, is adorable. But and he's from the mountains of southern Georgia. He grew up. The son of a sharecropper, and I mean, that he graduated from college at all is frankly amazing. So I don't hold this against him. It's, you know, the way the people he grew up talking it was I might as well just come out and say it. It was essentially American peasant English. You know, it's what subsistence farming people that probably were almost completely illiterate were speaking as recently as the 1950s and 60s. This man's not that old, you know. In his mid to late 60s right now, I would imagine. Actually, no, I did that, but I think he might even be like 60. But anyway. Yeah, I mean, my father grew up the first decade of his life apparently without the use of a car. The farm that he was on was using draft horses. They didn't have a gasoline or diesel or steam tractor. It was all just animals. And they had a horse-drawn carriage or wagon they'd use to go to a steam-powered grist mill in the town of Bentonville, of all times to forget the name of it. Yeah, Bentonville, just south of Front Royal, Virginia. And that's, you know, up to 1955. So, you know, the Eisenhower interstate system was built in the United States starting in the early 70s, wasn't finished until the mid to late 80s. So in 40 years' time, you've got horse-drawn vehicles still on roads to having superhighways with cars that are going easily 70 miles an hour regularly. I think that's kind of amazing. To say nothing for the advancements with computers and all that stuff. But anyway, getting back to the numbers here with the population, there were 62 language families in the North and South America combined. By the time the Europeans came, there were 329 languages spoken in just what's now the lower 48 United States, the United States between Canada and Mexico, excluding Alaska and Hawaii. 209 of these 329 languages are still spoken today, and that today is actually about 2007. That's when I have this information from. But they are dying very, very quickly. Mexico and Central America boast 350 languages, and South America has 1,450 languages. And that's just remarkable. But the other thing with Papua New Guinea, the thing that these areas have in common is they have the longest period of people living without being invaded or disturbed by any other cultures. People came into South America at least 15,000 years ago. Pretty much nobody bothered them all of those 15,000 years up until the past 500. And the same is more or less true of Papua New Guinea. New Guinea actually has the oldest continuous, well, I don't know about continuous, but it has the oldest agriculture that has been practiced for one period of time, and that period of time is 30,000 years. About 35,000 years ago, the people in New Guinea started practicing settled agriculture. They were growing taro, and a tree that apparently you can sort of make bread out of. The inside of this tree is filled with some sort of fibrous liquid that they sort of make a mash out of. Whatever. It's a very protein deficient diet, and eventually they ended up getting pigs. But before that, most of this time they had a hard time securing protein on their own, so they supplemented their agricultural practices with hunting, and they eventually ended up overhunting everything on the island, and that they had to resort to eating insects. And I am not supposed to say this, but I am anyway. I think this probably helped lead to some of the, explanation of why you see so much of the world's cannibalistic practices in this region. There are parts of South America and the South Pacific Islands where you also see cases of cannibalism, and there's sketchy reports of it in Mexico and the Southwest and amongst a handful of indigenous natives as burial practices in the Amazon. But otherwise, most of the cannibalism that you see tends to be from that area, and I don't think the fact that they were running out of meat in general is entirely unrelated. Now, let's see. The role of geography is another big thing. Between the Valley of Mexico and Peru is the most densely populated area in the New World. That's where it's warmest. That's where you can grow the most stuff. I mean, you can't keep things from not growing between the Valley of Mexico and the northern border with Peru, pretty much. I mean, it's just, lush and tropical as can be. So that's where you had most of the New World's population. All of North America is estimated to have been about 1 to 12 million people by the time of the Europeans' arrival. The Aztecs had under their control 11 million people, and that was just in Mexico. So there's a lot more people down that area, and that would also explain, of course, why there's more linguistic diversity. Agriculture was begun in Peru about 8,500 BC. Put that in comparison, England began agriculture about 3,000 BC. So they had about a 5,500-year head start on the Europeans as far as agriculture is concerned. I don't remember how many thousands of different potatoes that have been domesticated there are, but they're all domesticated in the high Andes. It's also interesting to note that the Mexicans, the Aztecs, the Mayan, they didn't have potatoes. They didn't have llamas. They didn't have guinea pigs. And they also didn't have sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes, guinea pigs, and llamas and alpacas are domesticated plants and animals from the high Andes region. That's where the Inca were. That is quite removed from the Central America and Mexican Mesoamerica area.
So what did they have then?
Corn, beans, and squash was domesticated in the Valley of Mexico. There's a grass called teosinte, which if anybody can find me seeds of teosinte, I've always wanted to grow that thing, because that is the native plant, the native grass from which corn was eventually domesticated. And when you look at that thing and you look at an ear of corn, you can recognize the amazing work that was done. It took those people thousands of years. I've seen ears of corn from just 3,000 years ago, and they're about the size of your thumb. So 3,000 years before that, they would have been about the size of maybe half of your thumb. I mean, it took a long time. And they just kept at it. They kept that domestication process going for all of those thousands and thousands of years.
Like modifying genetically in a natural way lasts longer.
Well, it's not natural, but it is selective breeding, and that's how... did I ever tell you about oak trees? It's, I think, 1 in 10,000 oak trees, or maybe it's 1 in 100,000. They actually have an acorn that is sweet and delicious and perfectly edible.
Huh.
You ever heard of that? In
No.
Europe, there are some very ancient for oak tree standards, 1,400-year-old trees that people have just known for a few hundred years. Is this freak? It's kind of like seeing a white deer. It's like a freak genetic mutation, and it's basically like people. Why don't you try to domesticate one of these oak trees?
Yeah.
The reason you don't domesticate oak trees is because it takes so fucking long to grow. Human beings just aren't around long enough for that to happen.
So it would have to be a continuous project, you know.
Well, I think the numbers are something like 1 out of 100,000 oak trees will naturally come out like this. And if you take an acorn from that freak tree, you only have about a 1 in 10,000 chance it'll actually become that domesticate again.
Right.
The other option would be to try to splice it, but from what I've heard, that doesn't work so well either.
How about cloning?
That, I guess you could, like in a lab?
Yeah.
Or,
Research lab with a lot of billions of dollars.
Oh, of course. Well, I mean, they could make a rat glow in the dark. I'm pretty sure they could domesticate a fucking oak tree.
Yeah. Well,
have you seen that rat glowing in the dark? I'm not making this up. Google it. It's fucking out. I mean, I read that in the fucking, like, Scientific American about 5 years ago.
Right,
Yeah.
so the point, it will take thousands of years to make it work.
Yeah, well, what I was getting at is, like, in order to domesticate something, you have to, it has to, with animals, they usually have to be herding animals. That way, if you control the head animal, you control the whole flock. Sheep, cows, goats, pigs, almost all domesticated animals are like that. The Africans have tried to domesticate zebras, but it never worked. And the reason is because zebras are kind of like cats. You know, they're pretty much solitary creatures. They don't take orders from anybody. You know, dogs are just domesticated from wolves and foxes. Wolves and foxes are social animals that have an alpha male that bosses them around. The human is then transformed into that alpha male in the relationship between man and dog, basically. You know, you have to have something there already to act upon. And this reminds me of another story of there's a group of zoologists studying baboons somewhere in Afghanistan. This was, I think, in the 80s or the 90s, and they were studying them. And apparently, there's a kind of it's a domesticated dog that's gone wild, which is called feral. If you have a domesticated animal like alley cats or dogs in the cities, they're still domesticated, but they can go feral, which means they were never around humans from the time they were born. And that means they're probably not going to want to live in your house and not break things and bite you and all that stuff. So that's feral. The state of West Virginia actually considers cats to be wild animals because they're too damn ignorant to realize that they're a domesticate. But it saves you money on taxes because the state of West Virginia taxes you if you have a dog.
That's retarded.
Yeah. Yes, it is. And if you build a dog house, they're going to have some guy come around every year and take pictures of your property and, oh, you built a new dog house. We're taxing you on that next year.
Whoa.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and it's kind of crazy because, like, I don't envy the man whose job is to go to the back hills of West Virginia and take pictures of people's property.
Yeah, that's kind of a loss of money on the budget.
Well, do you have any idea how many firearms there are between Martinsburg and Charleston?
Oh yeah, there is a tiny risk there.
There was a
Does
story.
you come up with free anti-bullet technology?
Well, there's when we had a prohibition in Virginia, it was hard after prohibition for people the state of Virginia to tax the sale of alcohol because people were moonshining, making it out in the woods. They sent out tax collectors or sheriff's people or deputy marshals or whatever the hell they were called, and the man was never seen or heard from again. And even the sheriff of the town was just saying, "Oh, he never came here. We never saw this man. I don't know what happened to him." It's like, "Oh, well, where's his car? Never saw his car." You know?
Yeah, That's pretty fucked up.
That's why they made it illegal to sell alcohol in Virginia. Only this state, Virginia, can sell liquor. You could sell beer and wine on your own, but you're not allowed to sell. You can't own a liquor store in Virginia.
That's weird.
Yeah, it's because they had to call the National Guard in 4 separate times to put down revolts. Because if the people are doing it themselves, they have to pay a tax, and they're refusing to pay the tax, so the people were coming to collect the tax, and then
get shot
at. Yeah. So the government was just like, all right, you know what? Fuck it. We're going to sell the booze. Nobody else does. We'll take the cut for the taxes. We'll give you the damn booze. There. That's why the law is like that in Virginia, and I think that's very funny.
Yeah, it is. It is. It is. I didn't know about this.
Yeah. But, let's see here. I'm doing review this week, so I'm just sort of going through the notes here on, without much, planning. Hey, Vosto, you weren't around for the one on Boudica, were you?
What you are saying, the name doesn't ring in my head, so...
Romans in Britain. Boudica, Queen of the Britons, fighting off the Romans, getting her daughters raped in front of her by a gang of angry Roman soldiers.
Ah, no, sounds good. Let's do this one.
All right, so this is from lecture 7, episode 7, Romans in Britain, part 1. I'm eventually going to do a follow-up to this once I can actually get my hands on some reading material. Our 2 sources from this are Cassius Dio and Pliny. And I'd like to read the Latin translations of those. The story takes place basically in what's now the southern, basically from Lincoln and south. I'm not really talking about any part of England north of Lincolnshire right now. This whole thing. Yeah. Julius Caesar came over with 5 legions when he was doing his Gallic campaigns from 55 to 54 BC. The campaign actually was, I think, from 51 to, well, whatever. It was a 9-year campaign. 2 of those years he spent fucking around with Britain. He failed miserably and lost all of his ships, basically. He secured just one small trade agreement in 54 BC. It wasn't until after the assassination of Caligula and the appointment by the Praetorian Guard of Claudius as emperor that the Romans seriously considered invading Britannia. And Caesar in 55 BC saw blue-painted men in the southeast of what's now England. That was apparently made by mixing woad, W-O-A-D, leaves, and ammonia, which back then would have been piss, boiling it down, pouring it off, and straining it, and that would produce this blue pigment that could be added to fat, semen, blood, wax, or maybe lightly colored clays and applied to the body. The legend is that this made the warriors invisible. In reality, considering the weather in England, it probably did help to greatly reduce their reflection in foggy, sodden conditions, I would think. Cast of characters we have here, I'm not going to go through this time because it doesn't read very well. Here we go. The story of the first wave of the invasion. In 41 AD, Caligula was acting so insanely that even his elite personal guard, the Praetorian Guard, decided that he needed to die. They made their move when he came back to the palace from some banquet that he was attending. They stabbed him about 30 times, Julius Caesar style, and he's reported by Suetonius, who wrote the book The 12 Caesars, to have said, "I'm still alive," as he lay bleeding to death on the floor. Then they stabbed him another 30 times or so, and then he finally died. After this, the guards noticed his nephew.
Yeah, sorry.
They noticed his nephew, Claudius, at this point, cowering behind a curtain in the corner of the room. So he'd seen the whole thing. Of course, you'd think maybe they're just going to kill him. Oh, he's seen the whole thing. Instead, they were like, oh, he's seen the whole thing. He knows we're going to kill him if he fucks up. "Claudius, my lord, you are our new emperor," they said. So he apparently had a stutter and a lisp, and nobody in the family ever took him very seriously. So he needed to get some respect for himself. In 43 AD, he ordered a general called Palladius, with a B, with a P.
Yeah, it's a difference there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to set up a beachhead. He sent 4 legions, which at that time was about 40,000 men, 10,000 men per legion. He did this and stopped when he reached what's now London. At the time, it was essentially the lands along the lower Thames where the Cativolani lived. Caraticus was the head of the Cativolani, their king, and he lost this battle with the Romans when Claudius came in and invaded. And after that, Caraticus fucks off, either towards Wales or into Wales. I'm not sure where he fucked off to, but he got out of Dodge. And at this point, because of the politics and propaganda, Claudius stopped and waited for the Emperor Claudius to arrive. Claudius attempts to go there by ship, but he's nearly lost at sea. He lands in Spain and rides overland through Gaul to the town of Gaiseriacum, present-day Boulogne. When he gets there, he brings elephants, just so he could show off. He's only there for 16 days, but he goes back, and then he goes back to Rome. This greatly helped his standing back in Rome. It had no impact on Claudius's work, obviously, although there were a few trade negotiations secured by the emperor himself when he was there. But many of the neighboring tribes opted to collaborate rather than being destroyed. And one of these such collaborators was the Queen Cartimandua of the Brigantes. And remember, the Brigantes are further north. The Brigantes are from what's now Lincolnshire, essentially. Her husband, Cartimandua's husband, was Venutius, and he hated the idea of going along with the Romans, but he wasn't king. He was just the husband to the queen. She was in charge. In 45 AD, Claudius sends 3 waves of armies, southwest and north. The 9th Legion goes to the north, the lands of the Brigantes, and they were an important buffer for the Romans from hostiles further north of there. Cartimandua accepted collaboration as these legions were basically on the way to her kingdom. So she had the option of saying yes or being killed, pretty much. But she was a sellout, and you'll hear more about that to come. In 47 AD, 2 years later, the Roman province of Britannia, basically southeastern England, had been established. The tribes north of the Thames just about were subject peoples, not directly ruled by the Romans, but they were collaborating with them. And these tribes included the Trevantines, the Iceni, and the Brigantes, from south to north. And the Cativolani, being the furthest south, having already basically been conquered, and their ruler, Caraticus, having fled. And while this was happening, Caraticus is off in the Midlands and the southwest, raising as much of an army as he can to harass the Romans. Caraticus attacks pro-Roman villages, and Claudius is recalled to Rome after 4 years in 47 BC. And this was typical of the Romans in this period, lest the men become too attached to their general and think maybe he'd make a good emperor. So about every 4 years, the Romans tended to cycle their generals. Okay, you've been in Gaul for 4 years. How about you go over? Caraticus is never found because he's hiding in fucking Wales. Rebellions are said to flourish in Wales because it's so damn hard to get armies in there. Scapula just burns villages and hunts down Caraticus's rebels to no avail. Now, at this time, as all that's going on, because it seemed like the perfect opportunity to attack the Romans when their back was turned back in the east, the Brigantes were starting to have a plot to overthrow their queen, Cartimandua. The queen, Cartimandua, discovers this plot by actually one of her husband's servants being a spy of hers. She's called on, and then she calls on the Roman governor, General Scapula, to save her, as that was part of the agreement she had made with Rome. Okay, I'm going to accept your rule and everything. If anybody attacks me, you send in the fucking Roman army to come in and save us like the cavalry. Caraticus was forced by this agreement to withdraw from Wales and go back to the Midlands area and save her. this made Caradicus look really, really good. Everybody thought, oh, wow, you made the Roman give up. And his armies, he got more and more volunteers to his army at that point. And he also decided to attack the Romans more or less directly now. He chose a spot in advance, built defenses as best he could, and thought that it might actually be enough. With all these new people he had, he thought it might be enough to finally crush the Romans. It didn't work. In the 6th year of the invasion, in 49 AD, Scapula crushes this plot in Cartamanua's kingdom, and that would have been in what's now Lincoln. Then he doubles his men by calling in the 20th Legion out of Colchester, which, by the way, was the Roman capital of this province at the time. It wasn't London; it was actually Colchester. And to join him in Wales, where he was finally going to have his last showdown with Caradicus after he had dug in. The next year, in AD 50, he attacks Caradicus in Wales with the 9th and 20th. Caradicus' own wife and children are taken as slaves in the course of this battle, which he loses. And once the battle's lost, for whatever reason, Caradicus he escapes alive. And then he fled to Cartamanua's court, but not to see Cartamanua, of course. He was probably going there because of Venusius. Venusius would have been an ally to him. He would have supported any attempts to kill the Romans, regardless of what his wife thought. But as they're eating dinner that night, she sold Caradicus out to the Romans, and the Roman soldiers burst in during dinner and arrest the man. Fiducius is disgusted. Caradicus, as we're told, was sent to Rome in AD 51 and brought before the Emperor Claudius himself publicly. We're told he gives a speech, something about freedom and the emperor and the fatherland and blah, blah, blah. The emperor pardons him. He was probably pardoned more because the Romans viewed sparing somebody's life to be a sign of superiority. I could kill you, but I'm so powerful, I don't need to. You are a worm. You are nothing to me, So he lives out the rest of his retirement in a villa they gave him somewhere just outside of Rome. As the Professor Garrett Fagan, from whom I've got a lot of Roman history knowledge from, says he had basically like a golden cage. And basically, so by AD 50, the Romans had more or less conquered all of South England. 10 years follow, where Venusius, Cartamanua's husband, takes up the fight Caradicus had started. But by the year 60, the pot begins to boil over again. And I'm very intrigued and uninformed as to what happened between AD 50 and AD 60. Cartamanua, I think, is killed. I don't know by whom. I assume Venusius took control and tried to head another army, but Venusius must have been killed before AD 60, because after AD 60, you don't hear anything about Venusius. So I'm not quite sure about that.
So no one has written anything about this period?
The sources are sketchy. I mean, there's a little bit of the Romans talking about it, but to the Romans, this was just yet another barbarian group they were invading. It's not like they took...
Didn't they find any letters, sort of lost letters, from which you can make some facts?
Well, those people didn't have very much writing going on.
Oh, yeah.
Cartamanua was almost certainly illiterate, and she would have been speaking a language, probably. I guess I can get away with calling it Proto-Celtic.
Proto-Celtic.
Mm-hmm.
So
or very, very early Celtic. Some sort of very early Celtic language. The language that she would have spoke would have been the ancestor language for what's now Welsh, Scottish, Gaelic, and Irish Gaelic.
Yes, but that is very similar. It's English language, only different in accent.
I would beg to differ on that one. In Welsh, the verb comes first. the Celtic languages are actually another subfamily. You have the Indo-European family, and then you have subfamilies like you have the Slavic subfamily, you have the Baltic subfamily, you have the Romance subfamily, you have the Germanic subfamily, and you also have the Celtic subfamily.
Ah, so that's why they get so mad when you make the mistake to call them British.
Yeah, like they're about as British as you are, man. I mean, I'm serious. Like they're as different from a Germanic language as a Slavic, or as excuse me. I keep wanting to say Romanian Slavic, but it's Romance. Although I don't know. You could tell me what you think. Should I think of Romanian as Romance or Slavic or Slavo-Romantic?
It's
Romanto-Slavic.
Romano-Slavic, maybe. Like the Slavic part is added after, And
Right. Yeah, you have that influence because all the neighboring languages are Slavic. Or
yeah. Okay. So we're kind of lost here, like a lost romantic language, surrounded by Russians and Ukrainians and Hungarians. We've been invaded by Austro-Hungarians. So now we have Germanic communities in the northwestern part. In the north.
That's Wallachia, right?
Well, you can call all the country Wallachia, but Transylvania, it's more like the place with German and Hungarian influence.
Mm-hmm.
And if
I know
you
there
go,
are actually some Saxons down there around the 11, 1200s. There are actually Saxons coming down there.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of funny because Saxons also went into Britain let's see here, about the 4, 5, 600s AD.
I don't know about that.
That's when the Anglo-Saxons and Jews came in.
And also in like northeastern part of Romania, it sounds more like Russian. It's like pure Russian accent over Romanian language, which is very not so interesting. I don't like it so much,
I don't blame you. I guess it might sound something to me like Spanglish. Ever heard of that?
No.
It's a combination. It's Spanish. It's mostly Spanish words with Spanish grammar, but they add English phrases and English words into it. And there's a way to do it, and it's a newly forming linguistic phenomenon. Yeah. But I was actually watching a crappy horror movie earlier today called 2359, and it's a Japanese movie about people on a military base or whatever that's haunted. But I noticed in it that the movie is in Japanese, but the army that they're doing, this is taking place originally, I think, in the 70s. They're mostly giving orders and stuff in English, and there's several instances where you can see how they very fluently will use English phrases peppered in their otherwise Japanese speech.
So there was an American influence.
Yeah, like
there.
I noticed when they wanted to say "shut up," half the times they just said "shut up," and they went back to Japanese.
That's what's happening. That's what is sort of happening in our country right now. They, the kids like to take words from the American, language, and they use it in normal Romanian sentences.
Right.
Because they're so used to the American culture that they sort of grab the expressions and use them.
And as far as we can tell, this is the same thing that happened with the Romans between roughly AD 1 and AD 1000, and that resulted in the languages of Romanian, French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese. There's a letter from, I think, the year 60 AD that I heard Dr. John McWhorter, the linguist, I really like his work. He was reading of a Roman in France, commenting on how people are starting to pronounce the words differently and say other things when they should say this in Latin, and he's commenting on how bad the Latin is in Gaul. But what he was witnessing was actually the very earliest phases of the beginnings of French.
I don't know, I contradict you on the Romanian side, though, because the Romans only stood here for like 100 years and occupied just a small space, and then they got beaten out, they got kicked out later on, and so they failed.
That's the thing I don't get about Romania, because Romania had technically less direct contact than Britain had, and Britain did not become a Romance. English did not become a Romance language, so why did Romania become a Romance?
I was about to say that because
Well, that's why I asked you at first. What started this? Why I asked you whether or not you wanted to consider Romanian a Romance or a Slavic language. Because if it's a Slavic language first, that would make sense, because English was a Germanic language first. You know what I mean?
Well, we have a Latin origin too. The Roman Empire has Latin origin too, and it has evolved it more. But the Latin that we originate from, it's more proto. It's more shitty.
And that would beg the argument that Romanian might be its own subfamily, and that the coincidence and the similarities you're seeing between Romanian and Latin are because Romanian is a direct ancestor from Proto-Indo-European, the same way ancient Greek and ancient Latin are direct ancestors from Proto-Indo-European.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what I have been telling in these. Whenever I had the chance to speak about it, even in that show with Douglas Dietrich,
Right. Yeah,
I don't know how many understood what I had to say, but yeah.
Yeah, and you showed me that documentary thereafter, and I remember that. And in that documentary, they were arguing that Romanian was actually the origin for Latin, and I don't agree with that.
Yeah,
I think the reason they're wanting to say that is because actually what it is this isn't Romanian being the dad and Latin being the son.
Yeah,
These are
they
two
want to make
brothers.
some money,
Let me go with my analogy. This isn't a father and son relationship. This is a fraternal relationship. They're brothers. You have the same father. That's why they're similar. That's why Romanian and Latin are similar, because they have the same father, which is Proto-Indo-European. That would account for the similarities, as opposed to Latin directly or Romanian directly influencing the other.
I agree, yeah. These guys who made that documentary, they are just alternative people, trying to push their own theory up, And I agree with some of the things that they say there, but not with the full picture, Because in their eyes, it's like this place is the origin of
they were very
everything,
nationalistic. I got the impression they think the Garden of Eden was also in Transylvania.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, Jesus was Romanian.
Jesus.
It's like that kind of thing.
Yeah. It's very funny, and they have also other documentaries about other crappy things, like the crystals which heal you, and
Yeah.
They are from the love and light side of.
Well, the only thing I've got with those crystals is that's all well and dandy, but what do you do if you've got problems of diarrhea? I wouldn't want to think about where you'd have to put the crystal.
Yeah, it's taking in account that it's quite sharp in some places, and it's not something so smooth that you would like to insert in places.
Speaking of insertion, we're going to go on with the story of Boudica now. So we're getting back to the Roman invasion, which started in 43 and ended basically in 50. And now in the year 60, we've got the story of Boudica. I said it started in 43, and I don't think that was right. It started in 44 3, I was right, okay. So who's going to grow up to avenge this? Or, it's like taking candy from a baby, so they just went ahead and took it. They didn't think anything would come of it. And here's where the story gets worse. Here's the infamous scourging and raping of Boudica and her 2 daughters, respectively. By the way, Cassius Dio doesn't mention them, and he's one of our only 2 sources for this stuff. The second source is Tacitus. He mentions that there were 2 daughters, but he doesn't give us their names. I was wrong in an earlier show that mentioned that this was done in Rome, but I've already corrected this once, so I'm now correcting it again. And they did this in her home area, presumably right there in the middle of town, somewhere in Norfolk, and they had her tied to a stake, and they're whipping the shit out of her as her 2 daughters are in front of her getting gang raped by Roman soldiers. Then they let her go. Boudica, the name, I'm not going to get into the spelling, but the story is that originally the name was Boudica, B-O-D-I-C-A, Boudica, or Boudica or Boudica. I think it's Boudica. But anyway, it was copied down incorrectly about 500 years ago, and we've been confused by it ever since. They started spelling it Boadicea. So Boadicea is wrong. It's supposed to be Boudica. Originally it was Boudica in Latin. The Romans wrote down all of these names. If you wonder why, Venusius sounds like an awfully Roman name for a Celtic man, it's because I doubt that was his real name.
Yeah.
The Romans called him. The Romans wrote this history down. To the victors go the history books. So I don't know what his real name was, but for our context, it's like
Charles.
Yeah, and Boudica means victory, and Queen Victoria I apparently is named after Boudica in that spirit, evidently. And at this point, I'd like to reflect a bit on the culture here in the Iron Age in Britain. The Iceni people had a fairly advanced metallurgy and a sophisticated form of jewelry that they were making. They had basically golden wires or cables that they kind of make into neck rings that are called torques. Sometimes it's spelled T-O-R-C-S, sometimes it's spelled French, T-O-R-Q-U-E-S. But it was their unique specialty. And there's a big find of these near Nedisham in Norfolk. In case anybody wants to see, there's a museum somewhere near Nedisham or in Norfolk. The archaeological find was Nedisham. I'm not sure where they're on display, but I do know that they are on display somewhere in that county. And I don't know if the county is called Norfolkshire or Norfolk, but anyway. And they also had their own coinage. Compared to the Romans, they were pretty quaint. The armor of a Roman soldier, this is an interesting fact, just the armor of one Roman soldier, one standard issue, at this point the Romans were being supplied their own armor. It was worth that of a small village at the time. That's how expensive it was. So, kind of like in modern parlance, it's about £1 million of money, enough to buy a small apartment or a pretty large grouping of small houses and farms. An average Iceni fighter would have been lucky to have a sword. Most of their nobles and royalty would have had armor kind of like the Britons, but that was just for the king and queen. And there's a Roman watermill on display and a reproduction in the Museum of London that you can see. I think you could actually go and move the cranks yourselves and pump water, and it's on a little internal cycle thing, so it just keeps going back and forth. According to Dr. Gillian Carr of University Cambridge, the land of southern England was more land in southern England was under the plow than at any point up until the end of the Great War, at this time in history when the Romans invaded. There was more land with food growing on it in AD 60 than there ever has been in England up until about 1920, with the beginnings of mechanized agriculture after the Great War. And of course, I take this as a given that there's not as much land under agriculture in England today as there was in 1920. I'm fairly confident in that statement, although I'm not certain. Correct me if I'm wrong. Anyway, like the natives in America, the native Britons held land in common, so land ownership wasn't something that they traded or sold. They had a concept of territory, this is where I hunt, this is where I plant my food, but the idea of passing a specific area of land on to your child, or the idea of selling and swapping areas of land or hunting grounds was not something they did. This is an indication that the population was still very, very low at this time, that there was still very much wilderness, and like with American history, there was a frontier for the surplus population to expand into. It took a long time for that island to get filled up, from what I can gather. Their common religion was what we think of when we think of the ancient Druids and their take on paganism. Paganism being, as far as I understand the definition, anything that's not Judeo-Christian, or you could interpret paganism as being anything that's not one of the 5 major world religions: Hinduism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism. Anyway, the Druids basically acted as some sort of intermediary between the various groups. But we know that they viewed rivers as sacred, and if there was a dispute of water resources or fishing rights or something like that between 2 rival kingdoms on either side of a river, the Celtic priests would have come in and acted as mediators between the 2 sides to prevent conflict, and they no doubt would have reminded them that the river is God, and you're fighting over part of God here, and you're going to piss off God, so quit fucking fighting. And that was probably, for what we could tell, rather effective. So, that's all I have on their culture here. Now, Boudica's campaign. Her campaign began in the same year that she had the whipping and all that. By this time, like I said, Venusius is out of the picture. We don't know anything else about him. And also, Gaius Suetonius Paulinus was now Governor General of Britannia. I've noticed from some documentaries in Britain that he's referred to as Paulinus by his last name. I've always known him to be called by his middle name, Suetonius. And Suetonius is the author of the 12 Caesars, and I've always known him as Suetonius. So if you're confused, if you ever hear anything else about this and they mention Paulinus, it's the same guy. And it's not to be confused with the Claudius guy, the other P word. Anyway, in AD 60, Boudica led her people, as well as the tribes south of her, the Travantines, to attack the Romans. All of this happened within the year of 60, from what I can tell. And ever since Caradicus was defeated, even before that, the Romans made what is now modern-day Colchester their capital. At that time, it was called Camulotum. This is where Boudica launched her first attack. At the time, it was estimated there were about 20,000 people, Britons and Romans and Romanized Britons alike, living there. They were all killed, and the last ones were holding up in the temple of Claudius, which the Romans had used local British slaves to construct. Boudica ordered the temple to be burned down on the second day when the people refused to come out, and burned everyone alive. The second thing she did after sacking Colchester was to move on to London, and at the time known as Londinium. She burned it to the ground, and to this day, the layer of ash, about 13 feet under the present level of the streets, is called by archaeologists the Boudica destruction layer. And if anybody is in London, preferably downtown London, I would reckon, and you see a construction site, and they're digging down to make a parking garage or something, if you're able to see a layer of ash, approximately 13 feet below the level of the ground, grab some of that. Just get a little mayonnaise jar or something. Scoop a little bit of that up. gonna hurt anything. I'll pay you for it. I'd love to have some of that. Anyway, as she was doing all of this, Suetonius was off in Anglesey, which is an island. I found it's separated from the northwestern coast of Wales by an estuary. And at times the estuary, I know from the Roman sources, is able to be crossed relatively easily, but this requires apparently timing, I've found out, thanks to Paul. Anyway, they were off in Anglesey because that was where the Druids held their last stand. That was apparently the Druids' capital in a way, or at least, sanctum sanctorum kind of thing. That's where they decided to, I guess where they had most of their rituals and whatever. It was really special to them, so that's where they held out, and that's where the Romans finally killed them. And Suetonius was off doing this as London was on fire. And these Druids, rather than putting up a fight, essentially were performing a ritual and praying. And that was when the Romans came over and killed them. Now, at this time, Suetonius received word that Colchester had been totally destroyed and that an army of rebels was on its way to London. He rode as fast as possible with an advanced detachment of cavalry to London. He covered about 180 miles in the first 2 days, and he got there in 4 days. The ride itself was 220 miles. When Suetonius arrived in London, he realized that the city was already lost and decided to just abandon it. Tens of thousands of people probably died when Boudicca sacked and burned Londinium. And at this point, Suetonius was in real trouble. He had already lost 2 major battles and could not afford to lose a third. The first 2, of course, being Colchester and London. We don't know where this took place, where this last battle with Suetonius, well, really it's the first battle with Suetonius and Boudicca, but we have a description from Tacitus, who's a Roman historian of the late 1st century A.D. He says it was a neck in a valley with 2 hills to the rear and sides covered in forests. In front of this position, Boudicca's massive army took position. They also brought their families with them. This could be because many of the women were also fighting at this time. It was very much everyone for themselves. Anyone who could hold a stick, basically, come along. And the wagons and carts were left in the back where the children were, effectively cutting off the escape route at this, funnel-shaped, kind of like a U-shaped valley. The open part of the U was being blocked by the carts and the children. The Romans were at the bottom back end of this U. We're not certain, at least I'm not certain, what tactics were used by the Romans. It is possible that they used one of their wedge formations, and this is similar to the rugby move, which apparently has been banned, called the flying wedge. And the idea is the Britons pushed up against the Roman line, which was designed to hold firm. The weight of the men of the Britons from behind them was pushing them up against the Roman shield, so they weren't even able to move their or anything. It was like the stories you hear about football riots where people were suffocated under the weight of the mob, pushing them up against the wall of the stadium. They wouldn't have even been able to attack them at all. And the Romans just come at them with their gladiuses, which is a short stabbing sword. You have this huge shield. You got a guy to your left and the right with another huge shield. You've got a whole line of guys behind you, and you just keep stabbing.
How did they hold those huge shields, man?
They were fairly light. They were well-designed composite. It was kind of plywood with bronze reinforcement. They were
they were effective, but let's say, I don't know, a sword could have cut it.
Maybe. Yeah, I guess.
If you go from the top, not from the center.
Well, yeah, I mean, you could probably stab your sword into it, and then it just gets stuck in the shield, and then you'd get stabbed, so why would you do that?
So then how would you attack these guys?
Well, the idea very clearly is that you don't. You just get killed. The Roman army was designed to, aid a relatively short Italian kind of person going up against big German guys with clubs.
Yes.
I'm serious.
In Romania,
So-
they didn't win completely. They won
Because
eventually.
because of
Eventually, they won.
Because
That's
of the
thing.
terrain. It was the terrain.
Yeah,
That's what
well-
made it. That's what made it so difficult. The
Yeah.
same thing is said of Wales, and Scotland was never even touched by the Romans.
Yeah, so they had an advantage on open fields
Yeah.
and
The
desert.
basic rule, I mean, if you're talking in the ancient world, if it's really hilly and there's no area where you could have an open battle, it's probably not a region you want to take over. With the way agriculture was practiced back then, those mountainous areas would have been really rugged and effectively poor. So why do you want to take them over? The areas that are rich and, where most of the food and the gold and all that stuff is are more low-lying areas that could support a larger population, more complex society. And then remember, in the ancient world, you don't have to go far to lose complexity. Yeah, the Romans had flush toilets, but you didn't have to go very far out of a Roman provincial town in Gaul to find people that don't bathe, they eat, half raw meat, they're living the way people were living 30,000 years ago. They don't even, there's still people using stone tools well into the Iron Age because sometimes it was cheaper, You don't, it's hard to build a forge to be able to melt iron. It's a lot easier to just bang rocks together if you happen to retain that talent. You know what I mean?
I wasn't listening.
Well,
I was paying attention to the chat room.
is anybody asking anything?
Nah, they're just ranting on their own.
Well, let me get on here with what happened with Boudica. Basically, the men were slaughtered by the Romans, and eventually the massive man broke and retreated. And this is when Suetonius sent in his cavalry from the flanks to cut down the retreating men. And then the mass got caught up against itself with the wagons and children, and the Romans proceeded to come in and kill everybody. Then when they went back, they beat up on everyone's home village who had anything to do with this insurrection. And there was not another attempt to attack the Romans in Britain for another 400 years after this. Granted, the northern parts of England were revolting, and Scotland, of course, and Wales. But that southeast, I guess, from the Midlands south and excluding Wales, that area of England had been pretty pacified and conquered by the Romans for a good 400 years after about AD 60. So from 60 to 460, it's Roman. And the funny thing is, the Romans were Britain was the first province that the Romans ever pulled out of towards the end of the Western Roman Empire, and it was in the mid 400s when they pulled out, and it was the late 400s into the 5 and 600s when the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes, Germanic tribes from basically Holland and Belgium and the Netherlands, came over into Britain, and so the British were first invaded by the Romans, and then the Romans leave, and less than 100 years later, the fucking Germans take over.
And the Belgians? What's with the Belgians?
Well, no, I'm just saying the region where the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes comes from is between Belgium and Denmark, basically.
Okay.
Yeah, mostly around Holland, but a little bit of southern Denmark, a little bit of north.
So they got made like Swiss cheese throughout history.
Yeah, well, the other thing is the story continues. The Anglo-Saxon language is founded more or less around 650, let's say. By I think it was 780 something, the Vikings invade. And they get the Vikings out of there sometime in the middle of the or the early 1000s, and then in the mid 1000s, the Normans invade, and the Normans are there for about 200 years, and that's where you get all this French. So between 600 and 1300, English went from being an offshoot of a kind of German to having Old Norse added to it, French, Latin added to it with a Norse accent, and then having the great vowel shift occur, and then you have that's between 13 and 1500, and then you finally end up with about Shakespeare English, which is the first kind of modern English as far as modern English is concerned. And then you have all the changes we've had since 500 years ago, which frankly isn't much. 500 years ago is still more or less comprehensible. They use words a little differently than we do today, but you could have a conversation with Shakespeare. Shakespeare could not have a conversation with somebody 500 years before him. They would have been speaking some really freaky kind of German, French, Nordic mess, and it would have been pre-vowel shift, so the vowels would have been completely different from what Shakespeare was familiar with and what we're familiar with.
Right.
Yeah, that's why English is such a mess. And that's why our spelling system is a mess, because we spell the words the same way we did in 1300.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's not so efficient.
Efficient? It doesn't make sense. I mean, why do we spell laugh with a G? Why?
Yeah, good question.
Would you do that?
Good question. Like here we write G and we pronounce the G in the word,
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's no such thing as a silent E. I mean, there is such the thing of it, but if you're going to write down a language, you're not going to take the word name and think, oh, I have to add a letter to the end of it. No, you're not going to. Nobody's going to come up. There's a reason it's like that, and the reason is that E used to be pronounced as recently as 400 years ago, but it's not pronounced anymore. And of course, 700 years ago in Middle English, it would have been nam, and that was name. It was nam, and then it changed to name, and then it changed to name. Yeah.
Yeah, name. That's how I would say it right now if I was to use Romanian pronunciation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and the word enough, the word laugh, enough used to be pronounced enoch.
Yeah.
Yeah, that the G and the H was a thing. That we actually did that.
Yeah,
so
it's hard to say it. Man. That's why they changed it, because you can't really say enoch. It's like pain.
Yeah. And knee was pronounced knee, and knight was kneeked. A kneeked in shining armor.
Really?
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
I thought it was always pronounced like you pronounce it right now.
Well, it has always been pronounced like that in modern English. You have to go all the way back to Anglo-Saxon for it to be kneeked. That case has been silent for a while, but at one point it was pronounced.
So my father, I gave a piece of paper with English writing on it to my father, and he was like, morning is very interesting. And maybe she was actually right, and I was just laughing all the time.
Well, it's because he's using continental verbs, and we're using what we would now call English verbs. But yeah, another thing is in German, they stopped spelling. They dropped the Greek ph. Any word that you see in English either that has a ph for an f sound either comes from Greek or from French, and the French get it from the Greeks. So ultimately, it still comes from the Greeks. Philosophy in German is spelled with an F. as far as I am aware.
Yeah.
Phone with an F.
Yeah, in my language as well. It's spelled with an F.
Yeah, because when you get right down to it, why do we need to remember, oh, this actually comes from the Greek character phi, and we render the Greek character phi as PH in the English use of the Latin alphabet? Why don't you just use an F? Why do you have to retain the etymology of the spelling?
And you don't even say phi, you say phi, you know?
Yeah, I insist on saying phi because that's closer to the Greek. I don't think I'm wrong on that, am I?
Yes, and also some English people say privacy instead of privacy, you know?
Yeah,
kind of related.
That must be a British. I'm not familiar with that one. Although I probably heard it.
I can bring you a British guy right now. I don't know if he's alive, but he always says privacy, and I know that's
yeah. Well, I've heard privacy. I just haven't heard privacy. I've either heard privacy or privacy, but I haven't heard is different than e.
Privacy, man. That's how they say. How he said it.
Okay, well that one's new to me.
And the philosophy, we say it here, like in my country, we say it philosophy. You know.
Yeah. So. Yeah, and if you said philosophia, I would understand that. I'd be familiar with that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. One of the names that I like is Sophie. I think Sophia is a nice name. If I ever have a girl cat, I'm probably going to name her Sophia. Although if I get a Manx, I'm going to name her Boudica. It's going to be. I'm going to get rabbits from the pet store for like $4 and feed them to her. You know, it's going to be awesome. Have like a cat, fucking gladiator thing.
Nice.
Yeah. I once wanted to get a gerbil for my cat for Christmas, but I was living with my mother at the time, and she insisted it would just be too messy. But I still thought that would be fun. Just like, you know, here, you live in an apartment, you're a predatory animal. Here's something to hunt for a little while. Have fun. Chase him around the apartment, kill him.
Right. Hey, I think we're at the end of the show, man.
Oh, shit. Oh.
I think. I don't know. Am I right?
Well, we can keep going as long as we want, but yeah, we're about 5 minutes before midnight Greenwich time, or excuse me, British summer time. Greenwich time. It's actually 11 right now, but yeah.
So how much did we went in this review? Like in terms of percent?
Oh, well, I reviewed the first 3 episodes sucked, and I didn't have that many notes, so I just reviewed 2.5 for you guys right here. I've got last week's, if you want to review again, and also the thing I did on the Aztecs. But that was the show before the last show, and I wanted to do ones before that for this first review. We can. I really liked the thing I did on the Aztecs. You missed that one, I think, Vosto, didn't you?
No.
Oh, wait, no, that's right.
I was here.
Yeah, I mean that whole ceremony with Kosh Koshley's daughter. You know, oh yeah, let's go see my daughter's wedding. Oh my God, they're dancing in her skin. What the fuck? And the whole time the Aztecs are like, "What? You're upset? Wait, what's going on? Why is he so angry?
Yeah.
This is our highest honor. We couldn't have done anything. This is the greatest thing we could possibly do for you. The greatest god in the world we're honoring by doing this, and you're angry? I mean, talk about, oh my God."
Yeah, you guys are primitives, yeah.
Well, not just, I mean, they're all primitive, but there's no excuse for crazy. You know, like, there's always good old-fashioned crazy. I don't care if you're in the Stone Age, the Iron Age, the medieval period, whatever. They're still crazy. They're people, you know, when the Vikings were going around, I bet most of the Vikings were just, let's steal some gold for these monasteries and get rich and then get liquored up and get some whores. I bet that's what most of them were doing. But then you had a few of them that were like throwing babies in the air and catching them with their swords. It's like the other Viking guys were just like, that guy ain't right in the head. I'm just gonna go over here right now and
Yeah.
Skull Crusher apparently was a surname of the Vikings. I know that. I don't know how to say it in Old Norse, but it translates as Mr. Skull Crusher.
I saw a nickname like that somewhere in some chat room.
Hey, you want to know where the phrase nickname comes from?
Yeah.
Okay, Old English, the word for I was eek, I-C, and you had eknamen. Now, eventually, and for mine, like you'd say like my Sally or my Vosto. Well, it would be mine. It would actually be pronounced mean, but it's spelled mine. So mean Vosto, my Vosto. Now the nickname, when English changed and instead of saying mean, we were saying my. Well, if it's like the word Edward, if it's mean Edward. My Edward, mine Edward, my Nedward, my Ned. So that's why Ned is the fucking nickname for Edward, because the N at the end of mine, when mine changed from mine to my, attached to the other word. So a nickname comes from an iknom, an iknomen, and that's where you get the N. Because otherwise it should be an ick name, but it's a nickname because it would be an ick name, a nickname.
Yeah, so they tied it together, so it's just
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, selective, selective.
And Nelly
evolution.
For Ellie is the same thing as Ned. You'd say my Nelly, and then after, if you say mine Ellie, M-I-N-E space Nelly, space E-L-L-E-Y, mine Ellie, you say that really fast, and you remember that.
Yeah, Rabbit Pinch confirms that both privacy and privacy are in UK. It's both ways.
I got a question. How do you all say basil? The herb. Do you pronounce it basil or basil?
Me? Or the UK people?
UK people.
I don't know.
Well, where's that dude?
We can bring Bob in, and he can actually tell you.
Yeah, I haven't heard Bob in a while, man. What's up, Bob? Bob's awesome.
Bob.
All hail Bob, creator of Dark City and all that jazz.
The dorks.
The founder and creator of it all, the backbone, the one who slaves hour an hour.
Sleeping or something, or I don't know.
He's probably wanking.
Yeah,
it's midnight, had a long day.
To me.
Yeah.
That could be a thing. His calls may be forwarded to me. Right.
Yeah. Well, I guess we should wrap it up.
Yeah, he's not responding to my messages. Right. Well, we can wrap it up. I'll play some nice... let's see what I can play here.
You have summoned me, Bob.
Wait, Bob's here.
There you are. Cool. So, is it Basil or Basil, my friend?
Basil.
Thank you. I was talking with my mother about this because I get the pronunciation from her because she used to grow it when I was a child, and I used to go out there and eat them off of the plant when I was a toddler, and she called me Joshua the Barbarian. But anyway, I've always known it to be pronounced Basil, and I was talking to some friends of mine, or actually friends of a friend, and they didn't know what the hell I was saying. And they said at one point, oh, wait, I'm familiar with an herb called basil. Is that what you mean? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, well, why do you pronounce it basil? I've never heard of that. And I finally have just started lying to people, and I just say, oh, my grandfather's English. I mean, because I'm tired of, this not being acceptable. She looked it up in her American Heritage Dictionary from 1997, and the first pronunciation in the dictionary is actually basil. Basil's number 3. That's in an American dictionary. But I think it's also part, like, people don't know how to say, it's not banal, it's banal. Or banal, one or the other. It's not banal.
Well, in America, do they spell basil with a Y?
No, I've never seen that. It's B-A-Z-I-L.
Yeah, well, if it was spelled with a Y, it'd be basil.
B-A-S-I-L, excuse me.
So it's basil, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's
Otherwise,
basil.
it would be basil with a Y.
Well, sometimes they would say because it doesn't have 2 S's that if the 2 vowels are only separated by 1 consonant, then the first vowel is made long by the second one. So, but if you can't apply that rule because you can't apply any damn rule to English. It's like I before E except after C, except for words like weird and any word from German. But yeah,
Weird. It's like
I'm just far too lazy for all that, Miles.
weird.
Well, no, I had a very difficult time learning how to read and write. I didn't actually. I could remember being illiterate when I was in 5th grade, and I couldn't read the menu at McDonald's, and I felt quite embarrassed about that. Thinking on my toes, I just simply talked to the person and said, "I want a hamburger, I want some fries, and I want a drink."
And
need
now
to
you're
know what the menu is in order to order something, but I didn't.
like a specialist in linguistics now.
I'm not a specialist in linguistics.
Well, you are in a way, like
I'm a
which
student.
normal citizen
I'm a student of linguistics.
studies
That's
this.
all. I'm just a student. But
Compared to me, Miles, you're a specialist.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I'm flattered to hear that. But to as far as I'm concerned, all I am is I'm just a student because the thing is, man, the more you start getting into any given subject, you get to a point where you realize the more you learn, the more you realize how much you don't know. Because the more you know, the more shit you know. It's like, oh wow, this is the explanation for all of that stuff. How's that work? I don't know yet. I gotta look it up.
Yes. Yeah. It's a circle. It's a cycle.
Yeah, for a moment, or a few days ago, I thought I was getting more intelligent. And then I found out that I wasn't. It's just everybody else was getting more stupid.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's always that. But you can't let that get you down because as somebody who lives in the United States of America, I'm submerged by stupidity regularly, and if you let yourself think, oh, well, by comparison, I'm doing very, very, very well, you're going to find pretty soon that you're not doing very well because the people are dragging you down if you actually compare yourselves to them. You should compare yourself to yourself. Are you happier now with yourself this year than you were last year, or have you gone backwards somehow? That's the comparison I think that you should go by. Use your own self as a baseline and either improve or not. There's no such thing as stabilizing. You're always either getting better at something or getting rusty at it, not practicing.
Right, well, I think I'll go for more practice then. I'll go for more practice.
I had to spend about 5 minutes the other day trying to remember how long division worked. It's been about 15 years since I've attempted to do it, and I was like, oh yeah, that's right. You make the dot and keep going. Yeah. I don't think I had done long division since Clinton was in office. Yeah, I was too lazy to whip out my cell phone.
Bob, are
Is
you
that
sleepy,
Bill?
man?
Was that Bill Clinton?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You seem like you're not a normal Bob today. You need more energy.
Me?
Well, it is
Not the normal
midnight.
Bob.
Yes.
No, man, it's been a long day. It has been a long day.
Yeah, see, I can feel it. I can feel your energies from far away.
It's your powers, Boston. It's your power.
Right.
The only man who can operate a server.
So, who will do the closing words for today's show?
Doesn't matter to me.
Oh, it's your show.
Yeah, well, just call it quits. Valete discipuli et discipuli. There you go.